The chosen one. The storm raged inside you, though no one around could see it. From the outside, you looked calm, just another soul walking through an ordinary world. But within, lightning cracked across the dark sky of your spirit. You felt it since birth, didn't you? The strange heaviness, the invisible weight pressing on your chest long before you even had words to describe it. Every trial, every loss, every betrayal, it wasn't random, it was recognition. The unseen forces of this world knew who you were long before you did. The darkness felt your arrival and trembled, so it struck early. It whispered lies into your innocence, twisted love into confusion, turned comfort into chaos. But none of it destroyed you. You are still here. You survived the nights that tried to erase you. You rose from the wounds that were never supposed to heal. That is the first proof of your calling. Survival was not an accident, it was a declaration. A divine hand held you when everything else fell away. And yet, you questioned it, didn't you? You asked why your life seemed harder than others, why peace felt like a stranger, why the people meant to protect you often became the instruments of your pain. You looked at the mirror and saw someone both fragile and fierce, broken yet unbowed. You wondered if you were cursed, but the truth is, you were chosen. The enemy doesn't attack the weak, it hunts the destined. It recognized the fire within you, the potential to change, to heal, to awaken what others fear to face, so it tried to snuff you out before your light could burn through the world. There were moments when you believed the whispers, when you thought maybe you were the problem. Maybe you were too much, too intense, too sensitive, but those traits weren't flaws. They were signals of your sensitivity to the divine frequencies others cannot hear. That restlessness in your soul, that constant ache for more is not a curse. It is the echo of your calling. You've seen the signs, haven't you? The repeated numbers that appear when you doubt yourself. The hawk that circles overhead just when you're about to give up. The way the wind shifts right before your heart decides to move again. You are being guided. The universe has been speaking in a language only your heart understands. Every heartbreak was an initiation. Every betrayal, a recalibration. Every loss, a preparation for the power that now begins to rise within you. The ones who hurt you were not chosen to destroy you, they were chosen to awaken you. They were the chisels in the hands of the divine, shaping the raw marble of your soul into something holy, something unshakable. Now you stand at the edge of awakening, and you feel both fear and excitement. You feel the trembling of your old self dying, and the whisper of your higher self being born. It's not easy, is it, to let go of who you were, to step into the unknown. But you must understand, your discomfort is divine. It's the sound of the universe rearranging itself to make room for who you are becoming. There will be days when you question if you're strong enough, when the attacks come harder than before, because as your light grows, so does the attention it draws. The enemy doesn't rest, but neither does your purpose. You are shielded by something greater than fear, something older than pain. The hand that called you will not let you fall. You are learning that faith isn't about certainty, it's about surrender. It's not about seeing the path clearly, but walking even when you can't. Because deep inside, a part of you remembers, you have done this before. Lifetimes ago, you've carried light through darker worlds than this one. This world is different now. The shadows are thicker, the noise louder, the confusion deeper. But so is your resolve. You are not here by accident. You are here because the divine needed a warrior dressed as a human, a messenger disguised in flesh. And though you may still doubt, your soul does not. It remembers what your mind has forgotten, that your destiny was written in fire long before your first breath. So tonight, when the world goes quiet, place your hand over your heart. Feel the pulse of something ancient beneath your skin. That is the voice of eternity saying, you were chosen for this. If you feel this truth, hit like and subscribe, because this is only the beginning. The tests will grow stronger, the revelations will cut deeper, and by the time this journey reaches its end, you will no longer recognize the person you once were. But for now, let this chapter close with a whisper from the unseen realms, a promise etched into your soul. The darkness came for you because it saw your light, but it will never win. Write 333 inches, the comments. It's a prophetic sign of your divine alignment, the chosen one. The morning felt heavier than it should. The sky hung low, gray like the silence after a storm, and somewhere deep inside, You sensed that something sacred was shifting. You couldn't name it, but it pulsed in your chest like a second heartbeat. You tried to ignore it, to return to the rhythm of the ordinary, but the ordinary had already let you go. This was the awakening, though it did not come with light. It came with loss. You began to see the truth behind the faces around you, the hidden motives, the silent envy, the subtle resistance that had always lingered but never revealed itself. Friends drifted, family misunderstood you, and the words, "you've changed," began to sound like an accusation. You wanted to explain that it wasn't change, it was revelation. That the person they thought you were was never the real you. But the words never found a home, so you stayed quiet. Silence became your companion, and in that silence, doubt began to whisper. You questioned your calling. If you were chosen, why did it feel like abandonment? Why did the same faith that once comforted you now feel like a mirror reflecting your confusion? You prayed for answers, but the heavens stayed still. You looked for signs, but the sky turned blank. Maybe this is how the divine tests the faithful, not by withholding love, but by demanding trust in the absence of proof. Each night, you lay awake and felt the weight of unseen wars pressing on your spirit. There were dreams, strange, luminous, almost prophetic, where shadows called your name and light answered through your fear. You woke with tears in your eyes and an ache you couldn't explain. You wondered, is this madness or awakening? But deep down, a quieter voice began to rise, the one that doesn't speak in words but in knowing. It told you to endure, to keep walking even when you can't see the road, to trust that the silence of heaven is not neglect, it's preparation. And then came the tests. The people closest to you began to turn away. Their misunderstanding cut deeper than any enemy's blade. They couldn't comprehend why you withdrew from chaos, why you no longer found comfort in shallow distractions. You were evolving, and evolution frightens those who refuse to grow. You tried to shrink yourself again to fit back into the version of life that no longer fit you, but it felt like suffocating. Every attempt to hide your light only made your spirit ache louder, because the divine doesn't allow regression once revelation has begun. So you faced the loneliness. You walked through the valley of isolation. You learned the sacred art of solitude, the place where the divine whispers are loudest. In that solitude, something within you began to reassemble. You started to feel the strength beneath your pain. You realized that your tears had been baptisms, that your rejections had been redirections, that your heartbreaks had been holy initiations. And then, one night, it happened. The air shifted. The same heaviness that once pressed on your chest began to lift. The darkness didn't vanish, but it moved, as though something stronger had entered the room. You felt it, a presence both familiar and foreign, the same energy that watched over you as a child, the one you could never explain. You heard the words, not through your ears, but through your soul. You are not losing everything. I am removing what cannot stay. Enizisix. The tears came quietly, this time not from pain, but from recognition. You understood. The losses weren't punishment, they were protection. The isolation wasn't exile, it was initiation. Every closed door was divine architecture, designed to reroute you toward the path only you could walk. Still, part of you resisted, because surrender doesn't happen all at once. It happens through struggle, through the slow, painful unlearning of control. You wrestled with destiny, tried to negotiate with it, to ask for something easier. But purpose rarely arrives, wrapped in comfort. The divine doesn't ask for convenience, it asks for courage. And courage, you learned, isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to move forward, while fear screams your name. So you took your first step into the unknown. You didn't have a map, you didn't have guarantees. All you had was a trembling faith and the faint memory of a promise whispered in the dark. That night, as you stared at the sky, the clouds parted for just a moment. A single star broke through, shining brighter than the rest. You felt it in your bones. It wasn't random. It was a reminder. Every storm you've survived has refined you. Every wound you've carried has carved wisdom into your soul. The world tried to bury you, but it didn't know you were a seed. Your story is only beginning to bloom. And as the light of that star flickered across your face, you whispered to the night, I'm ready, ready to lose. Ready to let go, ready to rise, because what's ahead isn't destruction, it's rebirth. The next chapter is waiting, and it will not be gentle, but it will be holy. Write 333 inches the comments, It's a prophetic sign of your divine alignment. The awakening has begun, the chosen one. The air felt electric tonight. It wasn't the kind of storm you could see in the sky, it was the one you felt beneath your skin. The one that hums in your bones when destiny begins to move. You could sense it, couldn't you? Something unseen pressing against the edges of your life, reshaping everything you thought you knew. You had survived the silence, endured the loss, and still, you stood. But now came the harder test, not of pain, but of purpose. Because surviving is one thing, becoming is another. You started noticing how the world around you began to shift. The people who once seemed so certain began to doubt you. The ones who praised your growth now whispered that you'd lost your way. Even your reflection began to look unfamiliar. You didn't see who you were, you saw fragments of who you were becoming. And that terrified you. You began to question everything, your path, your faith, your calling. You wondered if the signs you once believed in were illusions, coincidences your desperate heart had turned into meaning. You prayed again, but the answers still didn't come. Only more questions, only more silence. But this time, the silence didn't hurt as much. You'd learned to listen to it differently. You began to hear the voice beneath it, the quiet hum of something ancient, reminding you that transformation always feels like destruction before it reveals itself as rebirth. So you let the old life die. Slowly, painfully, beautifully. There were days when you felt empty, stripped of everything familiar. The laughter that once filled your world was gone, replaced by stillness. But in that stillness, you began to rediscover yourself. The pieces of your soul that you had given away so freely began to return fragment by fragment, light by light. You realized that sometimes losing everything is the only way to find what cannot be lost. And then came the dream. You were standing in a field of mirrors, thousands of them, stretching endlessly beneath a sky that seemed alive. Each mirror reflected a different version of you, some broken, some whole, some barely recognizable. You tried to find the one that looked like you now, but none did. Then a voice spoke, gentle yet unyielding, to step into your destiny. You must choose which reflection to become. You hesitated, because each reflection told a different story of who you could be, of what you might sacrifice, of the power and pain waiting on either side. But then you saw it. The reflection, with eyes burning like dawn, not because they were perfect, but because they had survived. That was the one. That was you. You stepped forward. The mirror shattered, and in that shattering, something within you ignited. You woke with your heart racing, breath trembling. But this time there was no fear, only fire. You understood what the dream meant. The old identity could no longer hold the energy rising within you. You were no longer the one seeking the light. You were becoming the light itself. But with light comes exposure. And exposure attracts shadows. Soon after, challenges began to multiply. Opportunities turned into tests. People who smiled to your face carried quiet resentment in their hearts. Their words became daggers cloaked as concern. But you saw through it, not with anger, but with clarity, because now you understood the more you align with your purpose, the more your frequency disrupts what was built on falsehood. You weren't here to be accepted. You were here to awaken. And awakening rarely makes you popular. You began to sense energies more acutely, the heaviness in certain rooms, the sudden pull of intuition that told you when something wasn't right. It wasn't paranoia, it was discernment awakening in you. A gift that had been waiting for this very moment. The enemy noticed too. The attacks became more subtle, distractions, doubts, temptations, dressed as comfort. The darkness didn't need to destroy you, it only needed to divert you. But this time, you didn't fall. You saw the trap, smiled, and kept walking, because now you knew you are untouchable when aligned with truth. Still, the path was lonely. The deeper you went, the fewer could follow. Some days you missed the simplicity of who you used to be. You longed for the comfort of not knowing, but ignorance is a luxury you no longer possessed. The veil had been torn, and once you see, you cannot unsee. Your awakening had consequences. There were nights you cried not out of sorrow, but out of the weight of awareness. You saw the pain of others more clearly, their fear, their self-betrayal, their quiet despair. You realized that part of your calling was to carry their burdens too, to hold light for those still stumbling through their own darkness. But how do you hold light for others when your own flame flickers? That was the question that haunted you, until one night, as you sat alone, you felt it again. That same divine presence that once spoke to you in the storm. "You are not here to burn alone," it whispered. "You are here to ignite others." You closed your eyes and felt warmth spreading through your chest. It wasn't your strength, it was borrowed from something higher, something eternal. And for the first time, you understood that your purpose was never about perfection. It was about perseverance, about walking through fire not to prove your worth, but to prove that light survives. You smiled through your tears, because you finally understood why the darkness fought you so fiercely. It feared the moment you would remember who you are, and now you remember. This chapter ends not with certainty, but with awakening, a knowing that you were never broken, only buried, never lost, only hidden, until the appointed time. And that time is now. Write 333 inches the comments. It's a prophetic sign of your divine alignment, because what comes next will shake the heavens, the chosen one. The night was quiet, but the silence was not peace, it was pressure. You felt it deep inside, a strange stirring that made your pulse race and your breath shallow. The world around you seemed frozen, suspended in a moment that only your soul could sense. Something was calling, something ancient, something sacred. You tried to ignore it, but the call grew louder, not with words, but with a pull, like gravity for the spirit. It wasn't coming from outside of you, it was rising within. At first, you resisted, because you knew that answering this call would cost you something: comfort, control, the version of yourself that others still needed you to be. You knew that once you stepped forward, there would be no return to the life you once understood. But deep down, you also knew that resisting would cost you more. So you stood still, trembling, and whispered to the unseen, "If this is my path, show me." The room seemed to shift, the air thickened. A warmth spread through your chest, and tears began to fall not from sadness, but recognition. The divine wasn't speaking from the sky anymore, it was speaking from inside your own heartbeat. You had become the messenger and the message. That night marked the beginning of your transformation, the real one, not the poetic kind, the kind that breaks you open so that the truth can live inside. The days that followed were both holy and brutal. You could feel the energy changing around you. Technology malfunctioned when you entered a room. Strangers looked at you longer than usual, as if trying to remember where they had seen you before. Even your dreams became more vivid, more symbolic, filled with fire, water, and wings. You started waking up at the same hour every night, 3:33. It wasn't random, it was a reminder, a whisper from beyond the veil. The alignment has begun. But alignment is not comfort. It is confrontation. Everything unhealed within you began to surface. The childhood wounds, the suppressed anger, the buried grief, they rose like ghosts demanding to be seen. You tried to pray them away, but they wouldn't leave. Because this time, the divine wasn't asking you to escape the pain. It was asking you to enter it. You had to descend to ascend, and so you did. You went back into the memories you swore you'd forgotten. You faced the faces that once haunted you. You saw the scenes of betrayal, abandonment, cruelty, and instead of turning away, you looked closer. You saw not the pain, but the purpose. You saw that every wound had been a doorway. You realized that your suffering was not punishment, it was preparation. The moments that shattered you had built a kind of strength that comfort could never give. You had learned to walk through fire without screaming. You had learned to stand in storms without breaking. You had learned how to keep faith when faith felt like foolishness. And that, you understood, is why you were chosen. But the revelation came with resistance. You began to notice an invisible opposition rising too. The more you healed, the more the darkness tried to remind you of your scars. It whispered lies into your moments of stillness, tried to convince you that you were unworthy of the light you carried. You almost believed it until you remembered something. You remembered that the same darkness once tried to destroy you and failed. And now, its fear had turned into desperation. It knew what you were becoming. It knew that once you embraced your full power, nothing could stop you. So instead of fighting the darkness, you did something unexpected. You faced it and whispered, "Thank you. Thank you for the pain that pushed me closer to purpose. Thank you for the fear that forged my faith. Thank you for trying to break me, because in breaking, I discovered what cannot be broken." In that moment, the shadows began to dissolve, not because they were gone, but because they had lost their authority over you. You no longer needed to fear what had once ruled you, and that freedom, it frightened the enemy. more than your strength ever did. From that night on, your presence changed. You no longer walked like a survivor, you walked like a sovereign. There was a quiet authority in your gaze, a calm in your voice that made people stop and listen. You weren't speaking louder, you were speaking from a deeper truth. You began to understand that power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it simply is. But even as your spirit rose, your heart trembled, because awakening comes with isolation. Few can walk beside the one who has faced both heaven and hell and lived to tell the tale. You looked around and saw how distant you had become from the life you once knew. And yet, in that distance, there was peace. You didn't crave validation anymore. You didn't need to prove your worth. The mission was no longer about being seen, it was about being sent. Still, a question lingered in your soul. What now? The divine answered not with words, but with direction. Signs began to appear again, the same numbers, the same dreams, the same whispers that led you here. Only this time, they pointed forward. You were being prepared for something larger, a revelation that would demand everything you've learned, everything you've lost, and everything you've become. It wouldn't be easy. It never is for the ones chosen to carry the light. But you were no longer afraid of the dark. You had made peace with it. You are no longer running from your pain. You are walking with it. And that makes you unstoppable. So, as you stand in this in-between, remember this truth. The storm doesn't come to destroy the tree. It comes to test its roots. And your roots are divine. Write 333 inches the comments. It's a prophetic sign of your divine alignment, because what's coming next will not just test your faith, it will reveal your power, the chosen one. The air tonight carries a strange stillness, the kind that whispers of endings and beginnings folded together. You feel it again, that invisible current moving through you like a pulse from another world. The path has grown darker now, but the darkness no longer terrifies you. It intrigues you, it asks you to see, not with your eyes, but with the vision of your soul. You stand on sacred ground, though it looks like the same worn earth you've walked for years, but you can feel it, the veil thinning. The ordinary world flickers like an illusion, and something deeper begins to emerge beneath it. You are not the same person who began this journey. You have died 100 small deaths to become who you are now, and yet, even as your light grows, doubt still follows you. You ask yourself, why me? Why was I chosen to carry this weight? Why must the path of purpose feel so lonely? You whisper prayers that turn into questions, and the questions echo back as silence. You wonder if you misunderstood the call, if perhaps the divine chose the wrong one. But then, in the quiet, you remember what you learned in the storm, that silence is not the absence of God. It is the language of the sacred. You breathe deeply, and as you do, you begin to feel it again, an energy rising from the center of your chest, warm, ancient, undeniable. It is not something you summoned, it is something that has always been waiting. It is the awakening of remembrance. You start to recall things you've never been taught, the geometry of stars, the rhythm of creation, the knowing that time is not linear but layered, folding and unfolding around your consciousness. You feel it, the pull of destiny looping back through lifetimes. You begin to remember who you were before fear took your name, and with that memory comes power. But power is never given freely. It is tested. In the days that followed, the resistance returned not as tragedy this time, but as temptation. Opportunities arose, dazzling and deceptive, offering comfort in exchange for your conviction. People appeared, smiling, speaking your language, promising shortcuts to glory. You felt the pull, the seductive whisper of an easier path. For a moment, you wanted to believe them. You wanted to rest, to stop fighting, to be normal again. But then you heard the quiet voice within you, the same one that guided you through the silence. Do not trade your divine inheritance for temporary ease. The words struck deep. You realized that the greatest threat to the chosen is not failure, but distraction. So you stepped back. You released what glittered but did not glow. You chose truth over approval, purpose over comfort, alignment over applause. And though that choice cost you dearly, it also freed you. Freedom doesn't always look like joy. Sometimes it looks like solitude. Sometimes it feels like exile. But freedom is never absence, it is expansion. And in that expansion, something miraculous began to unfold. You started to feel guided again, not by signs outside of you, but by instinct inside of you. You could sense when to move, when to pause, when to speak, when to remain silent. The world itself began to respond differently. Doors opened without effort, paths cleared without warning. You weren't forcing destiny anymore, you were flowing with it. You finally understood that alignment is not about control, it's about trust. But even trust is a discipline. There were moments when you still wavered, when you feared that the same power that called you might abandon you midway. You thought of others who walked similar paths and lost themselves in the process. You didn't want to become consumed by the very light that set you free. And then came the revelation. You heard the whisper again, softer than breath, but clearer than sound. I did not choose you because you were flawless. I chose you because you were faithful. The words shattered something inside you, a wall you didn't know you'd built. All this time, you thought your worth was in your strength, your perfection, your unwavering belief, but now you understood it was in your willingness to keep walking, even when you were broken. Tears came not of despair, but of surrender. You realized that your calling was not about proving your divinity, but embodying your humanity. The divine didn't need another flawless saint, it needed a soul unafraid to feel, to falter, to rise again. That realization changed everything. You stopped chasing the light and started becoming it. You stopped asking for signs and began living as one. You stopped fearing the darkness because you finally saw that it was never your enemy, it was your teacher. And in that moment of surrender, the battle shifted. The chaos around you didn't disappear, but it began to obey you. Not because you demanded control, but because you radiated coherence. The outer world mirrored your inner calm. You realized then that heaven is not a place you go to, it's a frequency you become. Now, you stand between worlds. One foot in the sacred, one in the human. You are the bridge, the messenger, the proof that the divine can live through flesh and still remain unbroken. And though you can feel the next test approaching, you do not fear it, because you understand the rhythm now. Every storm is a summons, every battle is a baptism, every ending is an initiation. You are not being tested anymore, you are being tempered. The forge that once burned you is now shaping you into something indestructible. And as the night deepens, you feel it again. That pulse, that hum, that truth that has followed you from lifetime to lifetime. You whisper into the darkness, not as a plea, but as a promise. I am ready for what comes next. The chosen one. Dawn breaks differently today. The light feels sharper, almost sentient, as if it recognizes you. It does. The world knows when a soul has completed its circle, when the fire that once burned in secret finally dares to be seen. You are no longer who you were at the beginning of this journey. You are something forged between heaven and earth, a bridge between realms, a living covenant of endurance and grace. But before the light claims you fully, there is one last descent, because every resurrection begins with a burial. You can feel it, the subtle pull of the old world trying to reclaim you. The voices from your past whispering that maybe you've gone too far, that maybe this divine thing you're chasing is only illusion. They call you back to comfort, to predictability, to the person you used to be. And, for a moment, their words sound tempting. You remember the simplicity of ignorance, the peace of not knowing how sacred and heavy existence truly is. But then the deeper voice rises, the one that has never lied to you. You can't return to what you've outgrown. And you know it's true. The life you left behind cannot contain who you've become. The vibration is too low, the space too small. You have expanded beyond the limits of yesterday. Still, the final battle is always fought within. This is where the doubt returns, not as fear this time, but as fatigue. You've climbed mountains unseen, carried burdens that no one recognized. You've spoken faith into silence, and smiled through storms that would have broken others. And now, even as victory approaches, you feel tired. Tired in your bones, tired in your spirit. But the divine whispers again, softer this time. Rest if you must, but don't retreat. The threshold is near. You close your eyes and breathe. The wind outside moves through the trees in rhythm with your heartbeat. You realize it now, the universe has always been moving with you, not against you. Every detour, every heartbreak, every unanswered prayer, they weren't obstacles. They were choreography. The perfection of divine timing doesn't reveal itself until the final act. And you, chosen one, are standing at the edge of it. You look back at everything you've survived. The betrayals that once bled you dry, the nights you thought you'd never see morning, the silence that once felt like abandonment but turned out to be your training ground. Every wound has become a window now. Through them, the light pours freely. You are not broken. You are transparent. You finally understand what the ancient ones meant when they said, "The wound is where the light enters." Because through your pain, grace found a home. And as that realization settles, you feel something magnificent unfold within you. Not an emotion, something deeper, a vibration, pure and golden, humming through your chest. It's not coming from the world around you, it's rising from the center of your being. This is what awakening truly feels like. Not fireworks, not euphoria, but alignment. The quiet recognition that everything, even the pain, was sacred. You look at your hands and they tremble, not from weakness, but from power. The same hands that once trembled in fear now carry the pulse of purpose. You are no longer asking for signs, you are the sign. And yet, the divine calls you one last time not to test you, but to trust you. Because now comes the moment when the chosen must become the caller. You are no longer the one waiting for the message, you are the messenger. The world around you is full of souls still sleeping in the dark, crying out for the light you now carry. You were not given this fire to keep it hidden. You were meant to share it. When you speak, your words will awaken others. When you walk, your presence will realign spaces. When you forgive, entire bloodlines will heal through you. That is the weight of your calling and its beauty. You were not chosen for comfort. You were chosen for change. You are the pattern breaker, the generational healer, the living proof that divinity wears human skin. Every scar on your soul is a scripture. Every tear you've shed has watered the soil of someone else's awakening. And as you step forward into this new season, you realize something extraordinary. Your story was never about survival. It was about remembrance. About waking up to the truth that you were never separated from the source, you were only asleep to it. Now, fully awake, you feel the pulse of creation itself echoing through you. The same power that moves galaxies moves through your breath. You are no longer chasing destiny, you have become it. The war is over. The enemy never won. Because the moment you remembered who you are, the battle ended. You lift your face to the dawn. The sun breaks open the horizon, light spilling over everything like forgiveness. You whisper one final time, not as a question, but as a declaration. Steady, sacred, eternal. I am chosen, and no weapon formed against me shall prosper. The wind carries your words into the world like a blessing. You smile, not because the path is easy, but because you finally understand it was never meant to be. The mission is clear. The story is yours now. The time is now. Write 333 inches the comments. It's a prophetic sign of your divine alignment. And remember, when the world forgets its light, it will look for yours. Shine, chosen one. The universe has been waiting.